All right, everybody, welcome back to In Progress. This is our weekly roundtable discussion of the political stories and issues and ideas that are top of mind for progressive folks all across the Lone Star State this week. My name is Chris Mosier. I'm the communications director here at Progress Texas, where we amplify progressive values, leaders, and actions via our major digital network, which includes social media and podcasts and legacy media contributions and a whole lot more. We reach millions of Texans all the time, every week and every month. This week, joined by Progress Texas board member and renowned Fort Worth attorney, Jason Smith. What's up, Cowtown?
Howdy.
So glad to have Jason back. And we also have, for the very first time, or not the very, very first time, we actually talked to JD at the state party convention a few weeks ago, renowned political and campaign strategist known for his time as the executive director of the Travis County Democratic Party and as the Texas General Election Field Director for Obama for America. JD Gins is with us. Hi, JD.
Howdy.
Let me say right up front that both of these guys I consider to be mentors of mine. I've learned a lot from both of these dudes over the years. And so as we tackle this topic, I'm really glad to have both of you guys here to kind of guide me through some stuff that I don't have a whole lot of experience with, honestly, and that is trying to kind of predict and think about what could possibly go wrong with the upcoming election in terms of interference from the Republican side. And of course, that's not anything new. We all remember January 6th. We all remember the recent redistricting that's gone on in Texas. Essentially, the Republicans have stopped trying to pull in voters based on their great ideas or their plans for the future. They are instead playing, a game that's really designed to game the system to stay in power. And so we've all begun to think about, what could possibly be coming down the pike? What signs have we already seen? What can we be watching for in terms of the future malfeasance from the Republican side? And what can we do about it now? Is there anything we can do about it now? JD, this has all started with conversations that you and I have had over beers in different places, Corpus Christi and other places. And so I'd like you to dive in a little bit with your basic overview of what you think we might be facing.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come on the podcast and talk about what we could be facing, which I think is very real election threats. I don't think I'm alone. I think a lot of people understand that after 3 decades in power, the Republican Party of Texas might not be willing to cede power to the popular vote. And there's a lot of different ways they could go about this. Election interference at the polls. In Tarrant County, they're limiting polling locations, access to the polls. But realistically, there's also fringe elements of the Republican Party that are now centered around denying statewide wins as well, the 17th Amendment. So there's a lot of different rabbit holes we can go down here. But at the big picture, after 3 decades in power, the Republican Party right now currently seems to be running on fixing all the problems of their decades in power. But if that doesn't work and voters see through it and they vote them out at the polls, will they actually hand over power, or will they make some sort of legal arguments about the federal races at the very least, James Tallarico? And I think for a while, the concern I had was that they were going to fight against James Tallarico being certified. I think the reality is now, I think their entire statewide ticket is in trouble. And so it's not a question of whether or not they can make a legal argument about the 17th Amendment, but whether or not they have to do more to keep people from voting, period.
Jason, what are your thoughts? Speaking of legalese, Jason's kind of our legal eagle that we bring in when we want to talk about stuff that might happen in various courtrooms. Jason, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think it's just human nature that the Republicans have been in power for 30 years and they're very comfortable with that power, and they're going to be really desperate. And so what I think Democrats and progressives need to get ready for is a street fight, because Republicans are going to try to pull shenanigan after shenanigan, and they're actually campaigning like they think they're going to lose, or that there's a chance they're going to lose. The economy's down, prices are up, voters are mad, and their voters are really apathetic. And so if they're going to pull shenanigan after shenanigan to try to limit our voters from accessing their right to vote, and in Tarrant County, the Republicans are going to limit the number of polling places. They're going to cut the number of polling places by 45%. They're going to take the polling places out of places like University of Texas at Arlington on campus, where a lot of younger Democratic-leaning voters are and places all over the county. And they're not doing that because they think they're going to win if more people vote. They're doing that because they're seeing their own polling, which is telling them they're in trouble and they're feeling desperate.
You need to look no further than Houston over the last, gosh, how many election cycles that there have been, very serious efforts to try and tamp down poll access for people all around Houston, which of course is the largest single, repository of Democratic votes in the entire state of Texas. Houston has very much been a punching bag for any kind of strategy they can come up with to keep people away from the polls, basically. This makes me also think about the manner in which, and I know I'm in Austin, I'm in a progressive bubble here, and, I can pay attention to what I want to pay attention to, but just considering the vigor and the style of the different statewide Republican candidates' campaigns so far has been very much kind of along the lines of what we're talking about. They don't seem to be trying very hard. Ken Paxton was widely criticized for going on vacation during July 4th with his mistress, and has, stuck his foot in his mouth, 8 ways to Sunday, and has, refused to answer questions of the press in the middle of a press conference. And on down the line, the different statewides, the guy running for Ag Commission, I have no idea what he's about. The guy running for Comptroller, Don Huffines, has been installed, already by the governor. And so it's there does seem to be a distinct lack of effort to win hearts and minds, to present good ideas, to present persuasive ideas that might entice Texans to keep voting Republican or to even switch to a Republican should they, be so persuaded. There seems to be no effort underway for that, which makes me even more, I don't want to say paranoid, but definitely worried in terms of what is their end game here. It seems as though they've got a plan B, and the plan B is not about the voters.
Absolutely, it's true. I think for decades, it only mattered who won the Republican primary, and then the Democratic, candidates put up a good fight. I worked for Bill White in 2010 when he ran for governor. That was the Tea Party wave. We actually outperformed the Democratic ticket by 10 points. We lost by 10 points still. And that's back when Democrats used to lose by 20 points in Texas. But it's been systematically, the gap has been closing. But what you're really seeing now in this election cycle is a propensity of Republicans who are fed up. It's not every Republican. It's not even maybe 7 in 10 of them who are still going to stick with the MAGA machine no matter what. But you are seeing in polling, you're seeing it on the doors and in the phones, Republicans are open for the first time. It doesn't mean they're ready to turn Texas blue and have it be blue forever, but they're ready to check single party rule. And they look around what's happening in this state. You have Greg Abbott running against data centers, saying he's going to put a moratorium on it. He's going to fix everything. He's the one that brought data centers to Texas. He's the one got video of him saying, hey, I'm going to make us the next Silicon Valley. And it's not a question of whether data centers are going to happen or not, but this is not the guy who you really want to believe is actually going to do anything about his own policies. And so now I think there's a willingness. When you look back at 2018, Beto had a lot of enthusiasm. He had some good money. He had a ground game. And as that wave was coming up, the Republican machine, the block of Republican voters who said that the state was going in the right direction, was still 100%. That people thought, no, everything's fine here. And the wave couldn't topple it. Now you're starting to see Republicans say wrong direction. Some polls I've had my opportunities to see puts that number at as high as 20% of Republicans saying state's going in the wrong direction. And so now that's the data I can see. That the Republicans, their campaigns can see it too. So it becomes not a question of winning the election based on the merit. It becomes, how do we suppress the vote? It's exactly what Jason was just saying. If they can limit the polling locations, thanks to Donald Trump's railing against mail-in voting, they've been taking more and more tools off their own playbook. Before Donald Trump, Republicans voted overwhelmingly more vote by mail than Democrats did. As Jason said, we see even in the heart of Tarrant County, which used to be the last bastion of conservative rule in a major metropolitan area, rather than win on the merits of their own policies, they've been in control of the county government. They've been in control of their state senators. Have a majority of the elected officials, rather than run on the merits of their own, wins, of their own priorities, their own policies. it's easier to just remove polling locations after villainizing vote by mail, which was a overwhelmingly a Republican dominated tool that now they don't have. So when you don't even want to count the votes, when you don't even want to give everybody the options to vote, you know that there's more than just winning on merit. It's how do you suppress the vote? And we're clearly seeing that not only in Tarrant County, but everywhere. And I think people have to be prepared. I've been saying to folks, you can't think about what your flood prevention plan is going to be or what to do in an emergency when the emergency is already upon you.
We've seen the governor hire Nate Schatzline, who is a state rep, outgoing state rep from Tarrant County, who is a certified nut job, and put him in a special position to come up with ways to limit the vote. And then you see a longtime Republican lackey be installed by Abbott as the Secretary of State. So that started. Then we're going to have a reduction in polling places to make it harder for people to vote. The Abbott administration has already undertaken a process to try to eliminate folks who they suspected were non-citizens, but turns out there's over 2,000 folks that appear to be citizens that were disqualified from voting, and they have to go through a process to get reestablished. So they're trying to reduce the number of Democratic voters and access to Democratic voters. And then the next thing we're going to see after they do those formal things is we'll probably see some open intimidation of people, either making it harder to get to polling places or having federal agents parked around polling places. Federal agents even scare citizens.
Oh, sure.
Because they've read stories where citizens have been taken to El Salvador.
Sure.
And folks just don't want to risk it. So we're going to see that type of intimidation. And then we're going to see court challenges. And we already saw with the Texas Supreme Court how they fall on making sure more people can vote. During the primary between Tallarico and Jasmine Crockett, there were some problems in Dallas County, and a judge extended voting. And by the end of the evening, the Texas Supreme Court put the hold on that voting and eventually disqualified all the votes after 7 o'clock, all the votes that were registered after the polls should have closed. This Texas Supreme Court has four Abbott appointees who served Abbott as either his general counsel or his deputy general counsel. And they are going to do the governor's bidding when it comes to doing all that they can to rule for less people voting in urban counties. You just watch. That's going to be the next thing. This is going to be a street fight. People have got to get ready for the street fight now, not on November 4th.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that line, you can see that what happened in Dallas County also happened in Williamson County. And those were origins based on, the Republican Party's central executive committees in those counties questioning the integrity of the elections. And so causing hoopla about having to have separate polling locations, and really a directly self-inflicted wound that affected both Williamson County and Dallas County. So this was an action taken by Republican precinct chairs to call into question the validity of our primary elections. And it worked its way all the way to the Supreme Court. And the end result was people's votes getting thrown out.
Yep.
And then Jason said it, I'm going to say it even more clearly. We have to be prepared for when ICE is deployed to the polls. And we haven't even began to talk about the fact that Donald Trump has been openly questioning the validity of our elections. Only elections that aren't, invalid are the ones he wins. And he tells them to lose. Absolutely, must be not true. And right now, it's clear if the Republican Party loses control of the Congress, the Trump grift is going to come to a grinding halt. Congressional oversight will fire back up. And so nowhere can he have more of an impact in affecting the outcome of whether that election is bad for him than in Texas. And that's why a year ago, the Republican Party changed the rules of the game in the middle of an election that was already underway to redraw the maps. And so when I say things like what they're going to do to interfere with the election going forward, sometimes people say, oh, it seems a little alarmist. In fact, you did, Chris, the first time when we started talking about this.
Yeah.
But you just got to look at
True.
their track record, and you got to see what they've been doing. And when it
Yeah.
comes to ending 30 years of Republican rule and having a diverse, it's not even turning Texas blue, frankly. It's just putting a check on single party rule in the state in one election cycle. They're going to do whatever it takes to keep the power.
We clearly are living in a state that has, seen the effects of, completely unchecked and unfettered one party rule up to this point. And so the idea after 30 years of that, as JD kind of said, as we started this off, is going to be unthinkable for some of these people. What do you mean we have to answer to this committee or these, congressmen or these representatives of the opposite party? What do you mean we have to do this? It's just, it would be unthinkable after 30 years of this. And also back to the redistricting thing, the zone is so flooded, y'all, that I think we all maybe kind of forget the massive amount of turmoil that just went down over the last few months over the redistricting of Texas that ranged from a full-on quorum break that has ranged, to a national uproar, a falling of dominoes across other states that have also done the same thing that Texas has done, all to try to get, Donald Trump 5 more congressional seats. And I think adding to the potential, trepidation that's probably being felt on the Republican side now is the idea that a lot of this redrawing that they did, especially in the Valley in South Texas, is looking like it's not going to be enough to overcome what's turned into a wave of buyer's remorse down in that part of the state on the part, understandably, of our Latino folks who have seen, again, speaking of ICE agents, this campaign of terror that has happened across the country. And I think a lot of us who don't spend a lot of time in the Valley may not understand how bad it's gotten down there. Thousands and thousands of people have been rounded up at their job sites and at their schools and at hospitals and churches. At Progress Texas, we've tried to sound the alarm as much as we can, but I don't think that even we have captured what those folks have been going through down there. And so the idea that just, drawing some, squiggly lines on a map is going to overcome the way that community has been treated over the last year by the Trump administration. I can see why they're worried about losing Texas at this point, in spite of all the trouble that they went through for redistricting.
There was actually some pushback inside the Republican Party about redistricting because it made other districts more competitive. And
that's right.
I think what's interesting is sometimes the narrative has been lost in the flood the zone of the Trump approach, but forget Donald Trump. If it was generic Republican in the White House right now, it would be a very likely outcome that the Democrats would take control of the Congress in the midterm. It's what happened to Obama. It's a natural pendulum swing. It is the two-party checks and balance. There's lots of problems with the two-party system, but it's a very predictable outcome that they're fighting against right now. Then you layer on all the ICE. Then you layer on all the corruption. Then you layer on all the interference with the election. And people...
And the economy.
Right? And, when you look at actually the bottom line of it came in with the promise of making things cheaper. And now even with the Republicans in power, Greg Abbott's like, well, we're going to make home ownership more affordable. Well, you've been in power. Greg Abbott has been a statewide elected official for 30 years. He's been in statewide office for 30 years. So now we're going to take his word for it that all of a sudden the working class is going to be the top priority. We're going to make home ownership affordable. We're going to fully fund our public schools. That's them pivoting because they know they're in trouble. This is what I was talking about at the beginning, though. I think early on in this cycle, they knew that Ken Paxton could lose to James Talarico. And there's been a movement afloat in the Republican Party to repeal the 17th Amendment and give states their legislators, gerrymandered bodies, the ability to pick their state reps. It wasn't actually until 1912 that states picked their United States senators and their electors via the popular vote. So for some, it's an originalist idea to go back to letting a gerrymandered body decide. But I think what they're starting to really come to terms with right now is it's a terminal corruption problem they have, and it's affecting all of their candidates down the ballot. So Gina Hinojosa's closed the gap. She's got within 1 point. We talked about Don Huffines, who was running for office, and rather than wait for the election to come in, they just removed the comptroller and put in somebody running for comptroller. This is like what you see in a corrupt banana republic.
Oh yeah.
Where you're just literally saying, instead of actually having Don Huffines get elected on his merit, we're just going to make him and give him the power of incumbency to try to win this race. I've been a believer that it's going to be a race like Don Huffines versus Sarah Eckhart that could really get over the line. That earlier, when I was at the Progress Texas party in December, I was telling you, I think it could be Sarah Eckhart because it makes sense that that's like just close enough that a competent person against a deeply corrupt person that we get there. But they're seeing their floor is dropping out right now. And they don't have a way to pivot to the middle again because their base won't let them. So now they have top to bottom, Tallarico all the way to land commissioner, a slate of candidates who could lose.
Yeah, let's not leave out Beau French while we're talking about that particular topic.
Yeah, Beau French, the original Rivercrest Country Club Nepo baby, who is a space cadet. So in 2000, Gore lost the presidency, even though he won the popular vote because there was a race in Florida that was too close to call. And there was a book Jeffrey Toobin wrote called Too Close to Call. And some takeaways from that book that are really applicable to this situation. Democrats have to have a legal strategy. We also have to have a strategy outside of the courtroom where we hit the streets and we let people know that we're fighting for their vote. And we're letting the other side know that we're not going to let them take our vote. It's got to be a in the courtroom strategy and a in the street strategy. So when they place ICE at the polling locations, we got to file a motion to enjoin that. And then we got to have people out there protesting that activity. At the end of the election, when there's problems with voting machines and people want to extend voting, we got to protest that, and we've got to sue to extend those voting times. And we probably need to sue in federal court, not state court, just because a state case is going to go to the Texas Supreme Court. Federal courts aren't much better, but there are some good federal judges in certain pockets of the state who could rule on these things. And it's getting that injunction to allow people to vote, which is what both lawyers in a courtroom and activists in the street are going to have to work in tandem to make sure that this election isn't stolen from us.
I do want us to go through what power we do have and best steps forward and things to watch for and all of that. And we're well into that at this point, but I do want to backtrack and clarify something that Jason just said. One of the primary courses of action, kind of where we already are before any of this has even, begun to happen, as early voting begins in the November election, is we are asking people who believe in democracy and believe in access to the vote to confront physically armed, masked federal agents who may be showing up at polls. This is a reality that stares us in the face at this point. Every single person who's all three of us here and everybody who's listening to this, that could be the next step. If indeed there is a major deployment or any deployment, I would say, of ICE type personnel to try to scare people away from voting, in whatever neighborhood, whether it's, whatever neighborhood it might be, a Latino neighborhood, a Black neighborhood, whatever it might be. If we're seeing this, it's going to be on all of us to actually do something pretty brave and pretty scary, which is going to be to stand up in the face of people with guns and people with masks and people with body armor and people with uniforms.
One thing that could help us is in Bexar County and in Travis County and in Dallas County, we have Democratic sheriffs who can deploy their deputies to make sure people's constitutional right to vote are not infringed upon. And when you have those folks show up, even if there is a federal officer there, it tends to offset that intimidation factor. So Democrats in those areas are going to have to reach out to those law enforcement personnel who presumably have values that respect democracy to step up and use their authority to make sure that folks are protected.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Chris, that people need to come to terms with that. This is what we're dealing with right now. From the end of single party rule in Texas and the inherent corruption across what happens in the single party rule to the open and brazen corruption of the Trump administration, there's a lot riding on this election cycle. So all options are going to be on the table. And if you have to think about what you're going to do if you have to stand in line, voting early to make sure that you aren't, stuck on election day,
Absolutely.
and having the courage in the face. Because you are intimidated by a masked federal agent doesn't mean you did anything wrong, right? It's naturally, that's the goal, to intimidate people. Oh, I'm going to have to stand in a long line, and there's potential of drama there, and maybe I just don't stay at home. But what is also in the polling now is that Republicans are not very motivated. I mean, some diehard MAGA people are still truly on there, but Democrats really are in that situation where they're ready to crawl across broken glass to elect James Talarico, vote for Gina, and get out. So, coming up with a plan, it's like what I was saying earlier, it's like in an emergency, a flood, a tornado, an earthquake, you don't want to have your plan make a plan while the earthquake's happening. So people really have to come to grips with this. And there's a real discussion happening among a lot of liberal organizations and civic organizations about how much they want to ring the alarm bell because they don't want to scare people off, which makes sense. But at the same time, if the first time people hear about masked agents at the polls is when it's happening, that's when it really can suppress the vote. And, I think we talked about this a little bit already, but coming back to it, Greg Abbott is actively changing the rules of the game in real time. We just got a new Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is a position that is appointed by the governor, but normally comes with oversight from the Senate. So you have a Senate session where they can ask questions about their beliefs on the policies. And, really the Secretary of State is supposed to be a nonpartisan job because they got to oversee the election for everybody. Jane Nelson was the Secretary of State. By all accounts, she was not great at her job. There has been some recent issues with keeping the voter file right. And, her office had some shortcomings, but she was not a MAGA extremist.
Right.
And they pushed her out. And why did they push her out? And you think about this, you're running for office. You might lose your first statewide election in 30 years, and somebody you appointed is not up to snuff for you. So then you
on board. Yeah.
So you on board with whatever maybe is in the works here. And so then you appoint your political staffer, your legislative director, to be the Secretary of State. It's like changing the referee at halftime because you don't like the way the game is going. And
Right.
so
and plugging in your second baseman.
Yeah. And so I think people have to really see the warning signs that are coming, that all bets are off the table. Deployment could come, interference. If it's James Talarico wins and Gina doesn't win, they could say, we're going to fight all the way to the Supreme Court about repealing the 17th Amendment, and it's up to the states, which, the Supreme Court has already heard this argument before in North Carolina about redistricting, and the Supreme Court didn't say no to this argument. They said, you don't need to use this argument right now. We already given you the right to redistrict. So they said, come back when it's something more weighty, like a state like Texas overruling the popular vote and trying to repeal essentially the 17th Amendment. But I think now that they can see there's so much groundswell, and the Republicans themselves are not motivated and or are motivated to vote across the aisle for one election cycle, they have to look at every other option they can to suppress the vote. And if you are a voter who cares about this election cycle, you got to be thinking yourself, what am I going to do? And to what Jason said afterwards, if that happens, what are we going to do? If they get to a place where they are basically overruling the popular vote, are we taking to the streets? Is it general strike time? It's crazy times, right? They say democracy if you can keep it. Well, I think we're right there. We're right there on the doorstep of, can we keep it?
Now, one thing we can do beforehand to make this less of a problem is get our vote out in early vote. In Tarrant County, we vote about 75% of the vote is in early vote. We need to really have a focused turnout operation and a focused effort to get every vote we can in the bank, because there are options of different places you can vote at. If there is an ICE presence at one voting location, you can find another voting location where there might not be an ICE presence and direct people that way. We need to get every vote out against Paxton Abbott that we can get early and get it in the bank so we can avoid problems that come with pressure on election day.
Absolutely. And to build on that, and something that I think a lot of people haven't fully thought about is, if people are coming out for Talarico and they're coming out even for Gina, going all the way down the ballot and voting for somebody like Alyssa Simmons in Tarrant County is critical. In 2018, the Texas Democrats actually ended up winning 12 House seats, 2 away from taking back the majority. And that was on an election that Beto lost. But the groundswell was so much that people and races that really had no business of winning based on, the DPI, what people anticipated was going to happen, surprised a lot of people. In 2018, there was straight ticket voting, though. So a lot of people could go in and they could press the button for Beto, and then they could press the button for straight ticket, and they didn't have to have the whole thing. And there's a big set of research being done on what people do when they don't know. Even if they're naturally inclined to vote for the Democrat, if they don't know who that Democrat is, then they choose to not vote just because they don't want to be making an uneducated guess. So a big part of this campaign of getting our votes out, getting them to vote early, is also making sure that they go all the way down the ballot and they understand that whether it's Alyssa Simmons in Tarrant County or Heather Jeffs in Williamson County, both women who could be the first women elected county judge in 2 major metro areas, that their votes really matter beyond Tallarico. Obviously, I support Tallarico. Obviously, it's really important, but we want to make sure that people know that their state house reps have an opportunity right now. Their county commissioners have. In Tarrant County, there's just so much going on, and that's why you see this backlash, why they're openly talking about controlling limiting the polling locations, because they know they can lose county government. They can be the anchor of losing the statewide vote. So that it's basically starts and stops in Jason's backyard.
Yeah, it's ground zero. So if anyone's out there wants to volunteer this fall, a good place to do it's Tarrant County. If you got some change in your pocket that's burning a hole, donate to the Tarrant County Democratic Party, because we need the resources at ground zero in this election. And sadly, we just haven't had the resources for 30 years because it's been controlled by Republicans. But there are a lot of people, even folks who've traditionally voted Republican, maybe they're George Bush type Republicans or Cornyn type Republicans who are done. But we need to get those votes out early, and we need to get ready for a court fight as well as a street fight.
I do want to, while we're talking about Tarrant County, remind everyone that there was a kind of a test run, a dry run, if you will, for redistricting that happened in Tarrant County before the state got a hold of the statewide congressional map. And so these ideas totally are percolating up out of the Fort Worth area. It is very much ground zero for what is to come. Guys, it's been a great talk, a bit of a scary one, I got to say. The powers that be here at Progress Texas said, Chris, try not to make it too scary. And I said, well, it's, scary is perhaps not the right word. It's urgent. I would say urgent is the word that we should be using here. And all of the stuff that we've talked about, think about how you felt on January 6th. It seemed almost comical until you really started to realize what was happening. It was an active attempted, insurrection, an attempt to overthrow our government in a very real way. It was an attempted coup. And so that came at the end of a Trump administration that was relatively normal compared to what we've been living through in Trump 2.0. And so we need to be thinking about the capacity that the Republican side has for bending the rules or even breaking the rules as we come up on this point where they are staring a long-standing here in Texas, 30 years of unfettered rule. They're staring at the end of that. And how scared they must be to be, facing a reckoning coming their way, and what kind of desperation might be possible as this moment begins to arrive. So we'll definitely be watching all this. Thanks again so much to, once again, renowned political and campaign strategist, former executive director of the Travis County Democratic Party, also worked for Obama for America as Texas General Election Field Director, J.D. Gins, and my podcast partner when I was just a baby podcaster a long time ago. So glad to be back with you, J.D.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And also Jason Smith, a member of our board and our definite man around town, down around Funky Town, Cowtown, Fort Worth, Texas, and Tarrant County. Jason, thanks so much for hanging out today.
Come help us out in Tarrant County, everybody.
Progress Texas amplifies progressive values, leaders, and actions. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media and action in the Lone Star State. Thanks so much for listening, whether you're hearing this on Texas Public Radio or on the podcast feed. More info about what we do is at progresstexas.org.